Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. Guys, have we had a wild couple of days again? I don't think the mainstream media are in the same reality as the rest of us, because a lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today, each one of these items has the ability to affect our daily lives in a ridiculously huge way. So, military training in Poland that's being offered out to literally everyone. We have a space war that's just started. We've got, I've just been off the phone to my friends in Ukraine, and they've been talking. You're not going to get this anywhere else, guys. We're going to be talking about glide bombs. We're going to be talking about the F-16s. We're going to be talking about the United States lifting the ban on military contractors working in Ukraine. We're going to talk about something that's absolutely ridiculous, and I can't believe it's even a thing. But the UK politicians falling for honey traps, guys. I don't know how this happens. We're going to, at the end, guys, we're going to finish off with a good old-fashioned bit of Russian propaganda and how the Russian media are reporting on things that are happening here in the UK and how they're reporting on things that are happening in the West. Guys, if you've not done so already, please hit the like button and the subscribe. Really helps me out when you do that. And it's just a little button for you guys. So yeah, I guess we'll just give in. I guess we'll just start and talk about the military training that's been in Poland. So Poland recently, they opened up their military training to everybody, and they said basically, you can come and have, I think they call it holidays with the army. And guys, I actually think this is a really good idea. I would love to see something similar happen in the UK. But basically, this is a 28-day package. And so it's called Holidays with the Army. It's a 28-day package, and it's aimed at people over the age of 18. Now, what can people learn in 28 days? Actually, people can learn quite a lot in 28 days, So I'm thinking, basic rifle drills, basic section, platoon maneuvers, tactics. That's going to be pushed in with some fieldcraft, how to survive in the wilderness. What I think's just as important to this is how to fit into the Polish military in general. Because what I've seen I'll use Ukraine as an example. What I've seen is, you get French doing some infantry training. Then you get British doing infantry training. Then you get another nation doing infantry training. And all these people have been trained, they're not interoperable. So I feel a lot of this training in Poland will be interoperability with the Polish military. Now, this has been absolutely overwhelmed, and they've got more interest than they've got spaces. So you can see the appetite for people in Poland to want to go and do this training, to want to learn, to want to do their part, to want to do their defence. While here in the UK, we have absolutely nothing like this. And I feel we're just sleepwalking into oblivion. Yes, I totally understand that Poland are in a different geographic position. They are right on the vanguard. If Ukraine falls, then Poland will be next. And I guess if you're Polish, your perception's a little bit different. Us over here in the UK, in our little fortress island, we would have a lot more time. But I still think people in the UK need to have a real long look in the mirror and understand what's coming. At the end, I'll put all the links into the description, guys. At the end of this 28 days training, the recruits, can we call them recruits? Yeah, do you know what? They do an oath. They have to do an oath at the end, and at the end of the oath, let me read you this, guys, okay? So they've done their 28 days training. At the end of it, I can imagine there's a barbecue, a few vodkas, and, the oath. At the end of the training, the volunteers, guys, not recruits, the volunteers will take a soldier's oath in which they swear to serve loyalty, the Republic of Poland, even at the cost of losing my life or blood. I honestly can't see people in the UK signing, doing this oath. Yes, of course, there will be a percentage of people in the UK who would go and do this, but I think most people in the UK would say, okay, I'm happy with a war as long as I can fight it online. And I think that's the situation where we are at the UK. I don't know, guys. Let me know what you think. Do we think the youth of today, the 18-year-olds of today in the UK, do we think these kids can rise to the challenge? Because it brings me back to the old, what's the thing? Hard times create strong men create good men create weak men create hard times. So I think we're in that cycle at the moment, and I think we've really got a step up to do. Also, guys, space warfare is happening. It's a thing right now. Just let me quickly, this should be a standalone video, but let me give you a brief overview. Most people don't understand how reliant on the space infrastructure we actually are. GPS, it's a huge one. All your messaging, your packaging, your delivery apps, all this sort of stuff's on GPS. On a larger scale, your shipping, and I mean, big ships now, your aircraft, all this stuff's runs predominantly on GPS. A lot of communications. There's so much stuff on with space infrastructure. It's absolutely unbelievable. And once these things start going down, then they have to take up redundancy from somewhere. So for example, military satellite X or whatever, they're taking up so much bandwidth. If that satellite gets taken down, they have to take that bandwidth from somewhere and they'll get priority. So guess what? All our internet goes off because there's limited bandwidth, or that bandwidth needs to be given to the military. So that's the reality of the situation. And now we've got actual strikes on Russian space infrastructure. The strikes in Crimea the other day, what was it, the 24th? So these strikes that went into Crimea the other day on the 24th of June, they targeted Russian deep space communications network. Now, the significance of this is I think the Russians have 4 of these systems, and if all 4 of these systems go down, then the Russians can't communicate with their deeper satellites. The stuff in low Earth orbit, which would be, I think it's up to like 400 miles or something. I may be wrong with that. But basically, that sort of stuff they can communicate with ground-based stuff. But the stuff that's deeper out there, every time it rotates around the Earth, that's when it can receive and transmit data. So while it doesn't, I don't see the strategic importance, I don't see the tactical importance of this network for Ukraine, but what it does do is it degrades Russia's space ability massively. So, and guys, just as a caveat, right, to the Ukrainians, to the Americans, to NATO, whoever's organising this, guys, we've got astronauts stuck in space. Let's just leave the space infrastructure alone, just for a couple of days. Just until we've got the astronauts back and we've figured that out. Because the last thing we need is the Russians and the Americans, fighting on the International Space Station. That would just be a massive drama. But anyway, this massively degrades Russia's ability to communicate with its space infrastructure that's in deeper space orbit. And again, I don't know what's up there. You don't know what's up there. The reality is nobody does. There was people floating about the idea like a couple of months ago, or maybe a month ago, about these space nukes. I don't think space nukes is a thing. I think it's embarrassing that, if somebody told me, hey Sean, I've got this idea to put nuclear weapons on a satellite and put them in space, I'd say, okay, great idea, but the problem with that is it's a stupid idea, because this fissionable material, it degrades over time. So if you're not going to launch that nuclear weapon within a certain amount of time, how are you going to recover it? It's just going to become nuclear waste in space. That should be on a t-shirt. Anyway, guys, so the relevance of this is it comes after earlier on this month there was a sabotage attack in Russia. It went widely unnoticed by the mainstream media, and you have to dig deep to find it, but this went unnoticed. This was another attack on Russian space infrastructure. Just outside Moscow, there was partisan groups targeting satellite communications. Now, remember what I've said for the longest time. I've said this as in the perspective on attacks hitting the UK, where you're not going to need your best, Russian spy who speaks 5 languages fluently with his little Makarov pistol and his tuxedo. you're just going to pay criminal gangs to do this. But guys, you know, this works both ways. The West could have quite easily paid criminal gangs in Russia to conduct these acts of sabotage. Reality is, we don't know. We're only going to put these to, you know, it's only going to be speculation at best. But all these things, all these attacks on communications, satellite communications, deep space communications, radar dishes, early warning systems, these are all huge combat indicators of a wider conflict, of a full-scale conflict about to start. And, you know, absolutely insane. So remember as well the perspective from the Russian side. You've now got potentially, well, the Russians believe this is NATO doing the targeting. It's US Special Forces, French Special Forces, British Special Forces, all identifying these targets and then telling the Ukrainians to take them out. There's a concerted effort at the moment on communications, on early warning systems. And that is exactly what you do before an attack happens. Because if you take out somebody's eyes and ears, you don't know what's happening. And then trying to put your QRF, your quick reaction force, or your reserve forces, trying to deploy them to the right locations, it becomes very difficult. For example, if you've got no eyes and ears and you don't know what's happening and you start to get an attack, a small attack, a diversionary attack, you would send all your reserve forces then to try and quash that. But the main attack would be coming somewhere else and you've got no reserves left because you don't know that it's happening. So that's kind of why you take out somebody's communications, eyes and ears before you do anything else. If you go on a sniper course with the military, they'll tell you, you know, take out the communications first, because without the communications, you know, the guys who you're attacking, they can't get on the radio and call for any backup or assistance because they've got no communications. So that's kind of why you take out the communications first. So an older article then, guys, from 2019, and I've said this a long time, when this thing came out about space nukes, you know, look back through my videos, I've said from day one it's ridiculous. What I said is the real, you know, the real threat is from ground-based space lasers, because satellites are on an easily identifiable orbit, and it's very, very easy to fire lasers up at satellites, and over time you can degrade those sensors. Some of these sensors, now these sensors that are, you know, well, imagine a satellite traveling at 10 kilometers a second at 150 miles above the Earth. Those sensors, they have to be really, 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 really sensitive. Now, you can imagine what damage firing, you know, a nuclear-powered laser from the ground can do to that as it flies over your country or your area of responsibility or wherever you've got your laser. So I said that's the real threat. Now, all this space warfare and satellite communications, it's all really come about since 2017, when, you know, all the military and all the defense networks, they were all looking for a backup GPS signal. And then Starlink got approved and it's happened, and now there's apparently thousands of Starlink low Earth orbit satellites orbiting the Earth. Now, Starlink is the only thing that we have in the West that the Russians and the Chinese don't have. So, you know, we kind of need to protect that. But guys, I'm going on a tangent. Let me just read quickly about the space weapons. Sorry, where are we? Not that one. Is it? Ah, there we are. So, I'll put the links in the description. Remember, this is from 2019, so this is old news. Obviously, this is like 5 years ago. The technology will have advanced and it will be mature now. And remember, when these articles come up in the news about technology, it's probably already at a stage where it can be commercialized or deployed. China, Russia building attack satellites and space lasers, Pentagon reports. China and Russia are developing a host of other anti-satellite weapons, according to Defense Intelligence Agency report that fleshes out concerns that the Pentagon leaders have been highlighting for years. So remember when I said 2017, you know, there was a lot of buzz, there was a lot of people trying to figure out how we can keep space communications and infrastructure? Both states are developing, China and Russia, both states are developing jamming and cyberspace capabilities. So we've already seen the Russian jamming capabilities with them. I think they jammed Grant Shapps' jet when he was over Poland or something, going to do this exercise, Steadfast Defender. There's been lots of reports by the Swedes and all sorts of people about the Russians jamming their GPS or spoofing it. By spoofing, the GPS would be giving a false reading. What that does is then, especially on drones, if you spoof the GPS on a drone, your computer on the drone, it tries to recalculate where it needs to be, and then it just goes in a total random place. But anyway, yeah, both space jamming capabilities. Directed energy weapons on orbit capabilities, so that would be a directed energy weapon on a laser. So you would have two satellites orbiting the Earth. You would have the good satellite or whatever, and then the bad satellite potentially chasing it. And then, this satellite can use a laser, just a solar-powered laser, to hit that satellite, and it would take it out the sky. That is why Elon Musk's Starlink is so important, because these satellites are small, they're cheap, they're easily replaceable. If you take one down, there's a lot of redundancy. So this satellite system, it's really, like I just said, guys, okay, it's really important. And ground-based anti-satellite and ground-based capabilities, and also ground-based anti-satellite missiles. So I think the main threat here, guys, is not from the satellite-based stuff. I think it's from the ground-based stuff. Why? Because it's a lot easier to maintain. You can maintain something on the ground a lot easier than you can in space. You can have engineers, you can have upgrades. If something breaks, you can replace it. So I think that's where the bulk of the anti-satellite war is coming from. And what we're seeing now, we are literally just seeing all this starting to happen. All this space war starting to happen. And, it's going to be an absolutely wild ride, because the next thing from this, once the satellites go down, you can pretty much, you have a free range of movement, because these satellites give a lot of intelligence on what's happening in Russia, what's happening in China. But also on the other side, Russian and Chinese satellites give a lot of information on what's happening in the UK, what's happening in America. So as these things escalate, the threat of more catastrophic weapons being used increased. Because, for example, if the Russians are getting attacked, they may think the attack's worse than it is, and they just may think, right, okay, this is it now, it's happening. And they may fire their nuclear weapons, and then the Americans see the nuclear weapons fired, so they fire their nuclear weapons, and then the next thing, it's happened by accident. But anyway, guys, that's the reality of the situation. So, leaving space warfare aside for a moment, I spoke to my friend earlier, and I've got a few friends who work in Ukraine. They work for NGOs, and and they're like security managers and consultants. Now, the word and the people on on Ukrainian news are talking about the Ukrainians are hopeful that the introduction of the F-16s that's coming at some point is going to restrict basically the ability for Russia to use the glide bombs. Now, there really is no answer for glide bombs. Even once they're launched, it's very hard. It would be very hard for to intercept them. For those of you who don't know, a glide bomb it's like a JDAM. They're GPS guided. It's basically a big explosive device with wings, and it's launched from an airplane, and it just slams into things. There's no flying around. It just goes straight, and it goes kaboom. The biggest one the Russians have at the moment, I think it's just under 3 ton, but these things are having catastrophic effect in Ukraine now. The Ukrainians are hopeful that once the F-16 start flying, whereas I don't feel they'll be very successful in, actually intercepting the glide bombs themselves. But what they will be able to do is they'll be able to do perimeter patrols around Ukraine, and then any of the aircraft that are, the whatever Russian aircraft are up, launching the glide bombs, letting the glide bombs come from, they'll be able to push them back so they're out of range. So the glide bombs range would be drastically restricted. When's this going to happen? You know, we don't know. Remember, there's still problems with the pilots, there's still problems with the ground crew, what we'll come on to. And what this could have a huge effect, because if the Ukrainians manage to push back the glide bombs and stop the glide bombs coming, this can give a break for the infantry, for the mechanized brigades to push forward under the Ukrainian air cover, and then they'll be able to expose themselves. Whereas at the moment, if they start to expose themselves, becoming big units, if their artillery, when you're doing one of these large coordinated attacks, you need your artillery, and your ammunition needs to be close to your artillery. Otherwise, there's no point having it. So these things present a huge target for these glide bombs. So you can imagine you've got a battery of artillery, and then, you know, whatever glide bomb comes in and it hits something, it takes out the ammunition goes up, it takes out the artillery. So you kind of can't do these conventional attacks. But if the Ukrainian Air Force can push back the Russian Air Force to a sufficient distance where their glide bombs are ineffective, then that may give the infantry a chance to push forwards and to make gains on the ground. Also, what they're talking about in Ukraine is, and this is breaking, guys, this should be the biggest, this should be all over the news. The US are talking about lifting the restrictions on private military contractors working in Ukraine. What does this mean? Well, they're talking about this as in ground maintenance and repairs for tanks, for artillery, for, you know, these sort of systems. But they're also talking about this as in repair and servicing for these aircraft. Now, I said for the longest time, and, you know, somebody tell me if I've said anything different, that these aircraft are going to be piloted by NATO pilots. Now, however that gets, you know, packaged doesn't really matter whether that's... In fact, let me just quickly read you an article here, guys. US government is moving closer to... And I'll put all these in the bio description. The US government is moving closer to allowing military contractors to be sent to Ukraine to help repair and maintain the transferred US equipment, according to CNN. Remember this tactical tiptoe. Biden's on the way out, so he can push things now and open these laws and make it happen. And as soon as America does this, then that bridge has been, you know, that river's been bridged. People are doing it then. Then the French do it, then the British do it, then everybody else does it. And then, you know, it's just the norm after that. According to 4 unnamed American officials who spoke to the agency, this proposal is being considered by employees of the administration of Joe Biden. But final approval from the head of state has not been given yet. We have not made any decisions, and any discussions at this of this is premature. The president is absolutely firm. There we are, guys. He will not be sending US troops to Ukraine. So we have what we're going to have. We're going to have this opened up the door. This is going to open up the door for military. What are they going to be? They're going to be servicing crews, they're going to be engineers, they're going to be technicians. But who's going to provide them security? Well, you're going to have a military PMC go with them, because this is a private, you know, it's a private company, it's a private venture. You know, so you're going to have your American private military companies now doing the base security. And then what do we mean by base security? Do you just stay in the base, or do you go out and have a little patrol around the area? Okay, you go out and have a little patrol. What happens if you come across any bad guys? Do you attack them? So you see how we're gonna get mission creep and mission blurring, and, you know, and the fog of war, and nobody's really gonna know what's happening. So that's what's happening at the moment. I think this bill will be passed, and I think it has to be passed before pretty soon, really, because as soon as Trump gets in, everybody knows that Trump's got different opinions, and he's going to do his own thing. Now, the F-16 pilots are key. They don't have enough pilots and they don't have enough technicians. So this is going to be the vehicle to get those guys moved in and start operating, start to fly the F-16s, which will in turn give the Ukrainians the gap on the ground, push the glide munitions back, and then that will hopefully let them do some ground air coordination with their infantry. Now, let's just look at this from a moment from the Russian side of things. The Russians don't care. And let me quickly guys, let me quickly put this in as well. Remember when, I don't know if you can remember, but it was like I think maybe 2012 or something, maybe 2000, I don't know, 2010, 2012. The Americans said they were pulling all the military out of, all the army or something, out of Iraq. Well, yeah, they did. And they literally just changed them over with private military companies. You know, the bases and the locations that they had in Iraq, you know, I'm not going to name the bases, but, you know, there was a lot of bases that were in Iraq that were manned by military. Then the US, they said, right, we're pulling all the soldiers out. And they did. They pulled the soldiers out and they put military contractors straight in there. They were doing the exact same job, but instead of wearing a uniform, instead of wearing, what was it, like digicam or whatever it was, instead of wearing digicam, they were wearing plain uniforms and civilian clothes. So that's the reality of the situation. And I think that model is going to be pushed over to Ukraine. Anyway, remember the perspective now. If you are a Russian, if you're a Russian national or you're watching the news and you don't, and I'll come on to some propaganda at the end, you know, and you don't really, you know, you're only watching Russian state media. You're now going to have a situation where the Russian media is saying that NATO aircraft are being piloted by NATO pilots using NATO weapons, serviced by NATO crew. Now, what the facility and the mechanism to get those guys in country and what t-shirts they're wearing, whether it's a uniform, whether it's International Legion, whether it's a private military, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter to the Russians because it's the perceptive. Guys, you know, and that's the situation we're moving into right now. And guys, let's just double that up with space warfare and how nobody in the UK is talking about anything like this. You know, we're all talking about, you know, Rishi Sunak and these stupid politicians making bets or something on when Rishi's calling the election. Which brings me nicely on to something. And guys, I honestly don't know how this is even a thing. So let me just read you this quickly, guys, and I'll put this in the description. So this is from the BBC website, and again, you can think of what you want of that. A man has been arrested in connection with the Westminster honey trap scandal. I didn't even know about this. So straight away, I'm thinking, when I read this headline, I'm thinking, oh, wow, you know, this is what's happened. I've like some, you know, I've some Russian beauties gone into some bars around Westminster and have they like, you know, have they seduced some politicians into giving them some vital launch codes or something? Wow, was I disappointed. Police arrested a man on suspicion of harassment and offences, blah, blah, blah. Right, here we go. Right. Earlier this year, a string of men, mostly working in politics, revealed that they had received unsolicited, flirtatious WhatsApp messages from people calling themselves Charlie or Abby. In some cases, explicit images were exchanged. Guys, right? I don't know how stupid these people can... These are the people who are running our country, right? If you get a message on your phone of somebody called... If you're in a position of power, you know, you're a politician, and all of a sudden... Abby sends you a message, I don't know, hi big boy, I was whatever, you know. What part of your brain, what is going on in your brain right now at that moment? I'm actually fascinated to understand what's going on in their brains. Straight away it's spam, you delete it, whatever. These are the people who are running our country and they can't even see a WhatsApp scam. Can you imagine what they would do if they had to deal with an actual Russian, Chinese spy who spent most of their life, you know, most of their background is, for example, Russian special forces. They've then done intelligence courses. They've worked for the intelligence service. They're experts in languages and non-verbal communications. Imagine how our political class are going to deal with this, guys. It's an absolute catastrophe. I don't know how it's happening. I really question, are they really this stupid? I don't know, guys. I like to think this is an isolated incident, but who knows? Now, talking about Russian propaganda, let me find this. And obviously, I'll put all these links in the description, guys. So, Russian media are proposing that the UK are going to conduct military training for all their, for all the civilians. Now, we're not being trained about anything, guys. All right, I don't know if this is a sign of things to come or whatever, but this basically comes from, remember when, like, I think it was maybe a month ago or something, Sir Patrick Sanders, he came out and he said the whole of the UK needs to prepare and it needs to be a nationwide effort. Well, the Russian propaganda machine, the Russian media, have kind of twisted that, so there is a little kernel of truth. So if you're in Russia, you can Google, General Patrick Sanders, and you can see, yes, he did make a speech. But the way the Russians are framing this is that, everyone in the UK is going to get trained up to a military standard and they're going to be ready for war to fight with the Russians. So now, guys, in the UK, we're not being trained on anything. We should be trained. Most people in the UK wouldn't even be able to open an airway if something happened. So will this change after the election? I don't know. Equally, maybe the Russians know something that we don't. But basically, that's where it comes from. So you see how something was said in the UK in the context of Sir Patrick Sanders was leaving. He said that there needs to be a national effort to train them. We need to have like a national force or whatever. And then the Russians have jumped on this and they're saying, right, this is actually the whole of the UK is now getting military training to come and fight us. Now, look at that from the perspective now of the Russians. So you're sat there, you're reading this in the paper. Wow, the British are training to fight us. And then the Russians put out a call. Right, guys, who wants to come and do some military training? And then the guys are sat at home and like, well, the British are doing it. Let's go and fight them. I think I was watching a documentary once and it's hilarious. It's something about this, and I don't know how much truth's in it, but the Americans were doing a disinformation a psyop basically on the Russians. And what they did, the Americans, they let the Russians intercept some communications about the Americans training up psychic soldiers. So the Russians have intercepted this fake news now and they think the Americans are training up psychic soldiers. So the Russians get a hold of this information and they're like, right, okay, the Americans are training psychic soldiers. We need to train psychic soldiers. Right, okay. So the Russians start their own psychic soldier training school or something. Then the Americans find out that the Russians have their own psychic training school. Then the Americans say, right, the Russians are training psychic soldiers. We need to train psychic soldiers. So you see how these things escalate humorously a lot of the times. But guys, most people just want to get on with their lives and look after their children and enjoy walks in the park. And we're being dragged into these conflicts. It's absolutely crazy, wild times to live in. Guys, let me know what you think in the comments. I've been going for longer than I normally have. I'm going to mag to grid now and I'll see you guys later.